Okay, so as we see, Lincoln's coming into his presidency, and the fight is the conflict is coming immediately, and so this is going to be a very different kind of speech, a very different set of issues to address for an incoming president, right? And so he's basically makes an argument that the Union is older than the Constitution. That's very smart, right? Because that's way of basically saying, you know, even before we have some sort of constitutional debate, the base at the base level, we are united. We are a union, and that means that no state can leave it. So, there he bypasses that constitutional debate, and then he says force and violence to secede were insurrection, were to be insurrectionary. In other words, that is a violation that is an act of war, essentially. Okay, so Lincoln and the South were not compromising in any way on what kind of what was to take place. Okay. Now, Lincoln sent up another supply ship to Fort Sumter, and the Confederate leaders ordered General Beauregard to take the island. Bombed it for 2 days, and on April the island surrendered, and here is where the Civil War began. So the Fort Sumter is really where it starts. As a side note, I used to work at a coffee shop in Modesto, California. It was a place called Plantation. Sounds very southerny, doesn't it? And we had an older, eccentric man who actually got me quite interested in Arabic, and he gave me a Quran. He used to work for the government, and he worked in Yemen, and he was photographic memory. He was a very interesting, controversial in the things that he would say. But he kind of left this kind of impression on me when I was younger, of the power of knowledge. I mean, he'd hear people's last names and knew where they were from right away. He kind of had almost like Sherlock Holmes qualities that I never saw in anyone. And then he passed, passed away, and he had me as pallbearer at his funeral, and I got along really well with his wife. In any case, he was living in Ripon, and he claimed to be the great-grandson, I believe, of Beauregard. And he used to kind of boast about that. Oddly, they kind of looked a lot alike. He never said anything kind of pro-Confederate or pro-racist, just anyhow. That was something he brought up all the time. So it's a small world after all, right? Anyways, okay. So then what happens? More disunion. Lincoln began a mobilization, and 4 more slave states seceded. Okay, so Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, but then 4 slave states stayed within the Union: Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Missouri. Okay, and many argue that they were kind of basically forced to stay in, that it was set up that they weren't allowed to secede. And so here's where it gets kind of tricky, right? So we do have the Union. I mean, we have this debate: was it over slavery or not, the Civil War, right? And on the Union side, we do have slave states that are going to stay. But I think you could argue that they were essentially forced in. And ultimately, we have to remember that the states that are seceding, what are they seceding for? They are seceding to preserve slavery and to create a union of interest. I mean, what's the one thing that all holds them together is mainly that. And even if one could argue that some of the slave states didn't want to leave, all that proves is that not every states' political leaders saw this as an issue worthy of justifying seceding. But essentially, you know, I mean, what we got to keep in mind is this wasn't Lincoln having this articulate, clear-cut vision of a post-slavery world or a post-Civil War world. This literally was a development of all of these things that we've been learning in our history class so far, and then him getting elected, and then just everything falling apart, and a kind of quick maneuvering on everybody's part to try to kind of pick up some cohesiveness to what next. Okay, so on the one hand, it's really quite amazing how quickly everybody is grouping in together to even have the ability to have a kind of fight in this way, to actually have a Confederate set of states versus the Union. But again, we shouldn't be surprised that there's a lot of inconsistencies in terms of what's going on, because this is a lot of things just kind of developing and unraveling very fast. Okay, so we end up getting two presidents now. We have Abraham Lincoln, and we're going to have Jefferson Davis. Now, really, and I'll be kind of a little bit elaborating on this. Jefferson Davis is a man who you could probably argue did not want to have the states leave, but ultimately he had to be loyal to the Southern way. So, and you'd see this. I mean, think about Andrew Jackson. It's hard to tell where he would have been in all this, right? Andrew Jackson is the one that went toe to toe with Calhoun and basically said this union must be preserved, above all else. At the same time, Andrew Jackson was a very devout slave owner. He had a lot of interest invested in preserving the Southern way of life. Would have Andrew Jackson, the staunch Unionists, have compromised on what end would he have compromised? I would argue he probably would have sided with the South as well. So what I'm trying to make clear is that some of these secessionists weren't guys who just really wanted to break off so easily. I think they really genuinely felt that in order to preserve a way of life that they valued and that they did feel they had a right to preserve and defend, as we see in defending slavery, that they had no choice but to secede. Okay, and so I think you see a lot of people torn there. And he was a military man. If you're looking at the Confederacy, and this is something that again I might be mentioning, is that there were you would think that they had a lot going in their favor to win the war, in the sense that they had so many decorated war veterans from the Mexican-American War and so forth. While Lincoln, he was in the Black Hawk Wars, and I think he was fighting mosquitoes more than he was fighting the natives. You could really pin him down as more of a politician in his legacy than a fighter. And so, there you would have, at the time, if you were a betting person, you would have saw a lot of an advantage, you would think, to the Confederate side in terms of what they had in their leadership roles, as far as it being military campaigns go. Okay. So then, who has what, the North versus South? Kind of what I'm addressing. I'm going to stop here, and we'll move on to the next lecture, and we'll go into that.